Hello and welcome to episode 29 of the vCD RoundTable. Today, our topic is going to be multi-tenancy, which should be logical with Cloud Director, but we thought it might make sense to have a quick discussion around what makes products really multi-tenant enabled, what are things you are looking for, and what are the advantages for service providers to use VMware Cloud Director, and why certain other products are not fulfilling the same requirements. But before we get into the topic, quick round of introduction. My name is Yves Sanford, and I'm throwing the ball over to Matthias.
Yeah, Matthias here. Hello. Sasha.
Yeah, my name is Sasha. Welcome, Toby.
Yeah, hello. My name is Tobias, and welcome to episode 29.
Good. Yeah, so multi-tenancy. We have seen many products in the past where VMware constantly kept saying it's a multi-tenant enabled product, and then you looked at it and you thought it's like, yeah, but really not. So maybe let's start with the area is what makes a product a truly multi-tenant. So one of the requirements when you go through audit logs and stuff like that, or auditors scenarios, is that the tenant by itself is completely separated from anything else. So that typically means you have the ability to utilize the same naming schemes and many other areas for the same customer. So for example, one of the topics is that networks, for example, can be defined by the customer, that it has something not necessarily to do with self-service. This is something which we cover as well, because there is a difference between multi-tenancy and self-service by itself. But the ability that every tenant can basically be the same, so and can utilize the same resources, the same naming conventions and other things. And that is typically the first part where you see other products then getting into struggles. So that being said, so maybe throw it over to Toby. So what are things you would say we need in a multi-tenant product, and what are nice to haves?
Yeah, as you already mentioned, the capability of separating infrastructure from multiple tenants on one hand. On the other hand, the possibility to get log files out, to have the possibility to provide log files to a tenant, and also on what I always try to or how I explain multi-tenancy is, let's compare it with Coke and Pepsi. On one hand, we have Coke as a customer. On the other hand, we have Pepsi as a customer, and we should absolutely be aware that those customers should not see each other resources on one hand. Also stuff like identity and access management maybe needs to be separated, that each of the tenant has the possibility of utilizing his own identity or access management, whatever he would like to utilize, Azure Active Directory or Entra ID nowadays, or stuff like this. So those are, from my perspective, one of the base requirements we have when it comes to multi-tenancy.
Yeah, let me put some interesting parts in that we have figured out and rethought about the last months when we talked with hundreds of service providers about the new license model, and they mentioned, hey, we only use vSphere as a service provider. That's completely enough. So we have our ESX host, we have a vCenter, and that's our environment. We don't use Cloud Director, NSX, or whatever. And so that's the starting point from my perspective on think about why we need multi-tenancy. Because in a vSphere environment, so in most of the environments, every administrator or service engineer of the service providers have access to all the complete environments from the customers. Not on dedicated parts. I'm not able to say, hey, you can control your own environment for a customer, or have a part of service engineers only working with one customers, to separate it really, because we have the physical network where we need the network guys, we have the vSphere networks, we have the vSphere complete environment, but we have no multi-tenancy. And though I think the starting point should be that we talk about how can we support this service providers, or how can VMware products support this service providers to become a multi-tenant service provider, like many other do it currently with Cloud Director. So that's one part. And then think about, Cloud Director, NSX, and the other products, ARIA, and so on, and how we can bring it all together for the service providers, because that's the goal. And if we get this features that we have now included in VCF, then we are also good with the pricing. Because if I only use vSphere for service providers and must pay for VCFs, that makes no sense. So I think it's important to talk about, or starting at a low level, to say, hey, what's Cloud Director and how can we use Cloud Director for multi-tenancy?
Yeah, go
and
ahead.
you have a valid point in there as well. Is one of the scenarios could also be that a tenant actually brings their own admin staff from third-party company, and they need to manage parts of the infrastructure, because that is more when it comes down to self-service scenarios. So I might go to service provider A to rent my infrastructure as a service component, but then I'm actually working with another either reseller or solution provider or something else to install a specific application, manage the application and things like that. So one part out of multi-tenancy typically or ideally should also be that within my tenant, I can actually define permissions for specific users. So for example, let's say I'm using an ERP and a CRM solution, and they might come from different suppliers. So then I want to only give one supplier access to all the ERP systems. To the other one, I want to give them the CRM systems. My own admins can see everything. And then I might have users who only have individual machines and things like that. So all of that is a requirement for multi-tenancy. And ideally, at least as long as we are talking about customers also utilizing self-service, that would then also require that the self-service actually gives the ability to manage the permissions, ideally in combination to what Toby said with Entra or something else, so that they can import them from other platforms as well.
As a final add-on, but mostly of the stuff has already been said. But to extend what Sasha already mentioned, one clear case should be that the vCenter itself is not multi-tenancy capable. There is nothing more to add or that you can bring to the table to say, hey, yeah, but there is maybe a possibility to have a vCenter as a multi-tenancy product. It was never the idea behind. And so also clearly nowadays vCenter is not multi-tenancy capable.
And VMware said multiple times, you should not expose your vCenter in such a scenario, either to the web or anything else. And if we just take, and I did the post the other day on one of the services is where we take a look at the Mitra attack, which happened just a few weeks ago. That was the perfect example. I mean, they did not come in via a publicly hosted web server, vCenter, but they utilized the vCenter to get access to the infrastructure and actually replace the web components of the vCenter. How exactly that happened is not fully disclosed, but again, those are all scenarios. You need to have that. And when it comes down to that, also another point is, and that has not necessarily anything directly to do with the fact that you want to have multi-tenancy, but something VMware again and again makes clear. It is expected that if you utilize something like Cloud Director, that you have a true web application firewall, ideally with IDS, IPS solutions and stuff like that in front of it to protect those systems. So that is clearly one part of it as well. But as said, it's like multi-tenancy is a true requirement for service providers. And you should have really a complete separation of duties. Also coming back to the lock topic, which Toby said before, it should be clearly visible for the customer if it was something they did internally or if it was done by the service provider. All of that should be visible in the logs. It should not be in a scenario where you only see the tasks done by your own people, but you should also see what the service provider has done to your infrastructure and things like that. Matthias, you're awfully quiet. That's unusual.
Yeah, you can't deal with it. I think another interesting aspect is And that's a combination of kind of multi-tenancy and what Sasha said, who has access to which parts of the infrastructure. In a larger infrastructure with many customers, it's pretty complex to keep the big picture in mind. So it's easy to fat finger something like connecting a virtual machine to the wrong distributed port group. If you just think about a vCenter and you have an admin handling a few hundreds customers, you just connect the virtual machine to the wrong network. It's that simple. And then you create a data breach or anything else. And I think, speaking of Cloud Director, just separating all of those infrastructure also from a UI perspective makes it a lot easier to administer stuff, because if I access a tenant portal of a single customer, I have only the virtual machines, networks, networking services of that customer in front of me on the screen. And that makes life a lot easier. Speaking of, right? So also kind of having the same subnets over and over and over. I think that's something, it's just not names of networks, virtual machines, whatever. So object naming, it's also like having identical objects in the same infrastructure. It's also key for multi-tenancy, because many customers prefer the 192.168.0.0/24 subnet. I have no idea how often that is used, but it's the same. So it's an object, maybe the same name, but also the same configuration. So that's also part of the game.
Another important part when we talk about multi-tenancy in tools is that very often, and in this case in the VMware space, it's Cloud Director which provides that functionality, because the underlying products like vSphere, like NSX, or even things like ARIA operations do not necessarily internally provide these separation of duties. So then it's important that you have a portal which can actually provide this this clear separation, because as we know, as Toby said, it's like vCenter by itself is not multi-tenant enabled. NSX has some pieces, and maybe we can cover that. But ARIA operations, I mean, there is this long ago white paper which we wrote around the topic of how to more or less misuse vCenter Operations Manager back in the days as a multi-tenant solution to overcome some of these hurdles. Luckily nowadays we have better solutions for that, but that's another important part, is when you look into multi-tenant solutions, is how good can it integrate other tools? Because the reality is the majority of products are not multi-tenant enabled. It has become better in the last couple of years because more and more software vendors build for cloud and SaaS and identify that they don't want to have everything installed on a per tenant basis. But you still see how often companies and software struggles with the fact of having multi-tenant features in the first place. And I mean, maybe we cover exactly the NSX part. I mean, there is always, I always have the feeling it's a forth and back, because it's always bubbling up on some of the NSX slides. It's like NSX is now finally multi-tenant enabled, and then you look into it, it's like, maybe not.
Maybe not. Let's quickly have a look, because I think we had already a session about. Also, I know we had a session about NSX projects. The idea behind NSX project is to get a sort of multi-tenancy, but more or less from an enterprise customer perspective, to really have the possibility that inside an enterprise organization you have different departments, different stuff. They really should consume their own tier 1 gateways, their own firewall rule sets, and you can limit it more or less on the amount of how many networks, how many tier 1 gateways, how many firewall rules and stuff like this. So it is, as you mentioned, Yves, it is a sort of multi-tenancy, but never ever really going down to the whole infrastructure. So inside an NSX project, for example, I cannot deploy my own edge cluster. This is always something the organization admin or the full admin of the whole NSX environment needs to deploy a new edge cluster, needs to create the tier 0 gateway, and then assign the tier 0 gateway to my NSX project. So I will never ever be capable of really utilizing the full underlying infrastructure or bring in additional hosts or stuff like this. So also from a multi-tenancy perspective, from a consumption perspective, yes, but not what really is the use case of having self-service, having really multi-tenancy capable environments.
But that's cloud director's job, right? from a service perspective. But I think with the networking piece, it's always a bit difficult because we're still talking about networking. So a centralized network infrastructure. It's not. So we could start a philosophical discussion. What is true multi-tenancy in the network? So some would come up with like, yeah, physical separation. So I can do whatever I want. That's true multi-tenancy. Or am I allowed to share the same physical gear and use just VLAN for separation and add some firewalls on top, like tenant A, tenant B, tenant C, so physical firewall separation? So I think it's a philosophical discussion. What's true multi-tenancy? And I think it's the exact same thing for NSX. You're not kind of installing the same physical infrastructure over and over and over, because there would be a vCenter, ESXi host, and so on and so forth, and additional NSX managers. So it's a per tenant installation. I think NSX projects, it's aiming for enabling, and as you, Toby, started with, enabling different departments within a customer to manage their smaller network infrastructure, which is part of the whole. And you as a provider, make sure they can't mess up with the physical upstream network by implementing proper prefix filters and routings and stuff like this.
Sasha, you would like to add something, or you started already before?
Yeah, so my question was with the NSX project. So that's new only for new deployments, or can we deploy it in brownfield?
Yeah, tough one. You can enable the compute manager, so at the end the vCenter, after you have instantiated it, you can say, hey, it is now multi-tenant, but there is a bunch of requirements which needs to be fulfilled to change it afterwards. So technically we can say yes, but the truth will, from my perspective at the moment, is no. If you have started already ramping up your whole environment without multi-tenancy, you a little bit messed up. From a pure NSX perspective, absolutely. So you can, every time you can go into your NSX manager and say, hey, I would like to create a new project, bring in all of the necessary information. The matching part, or the most important part currently regarding projects is the vCenter, because the vCenter needs to be enabled as multi-tenant capable or project capable. I don't know how the right name is currently, to be honest. But it is kind of brownfield capable, yes.
Okay, that means it's best practice normally if I create a new environment with a new vCenter and bring it in, that's the easiest way.
But then you need to have a look into the documentation, what is then not working currently, because there are slightly differences between having vCenter multi-tenant enabled. Not all of the stuff currently is really working, but to be honest, most of the stuff is related to the old load balancing, not to the new one. But I have something in mind, not really 100% sure. Also with ALB, no, ALB is currently not capable of projects. So ALB can be only integrated in the main or in the master, let's call it master tenant, but not in any kind of sub project. So this is also something we need to have in mind currently, that ALB is not aware of NSX projects.
Okay.
But hey, we are talking about two VMware products, so why should they be compatible to each other?
Compatibility is overrated.
Absolutely.
And it depends. So before using NSX projects, you should do a proper design and discussing the pros and cons anyway, and validate if it even makes sense for your infrastructure, introduce that new feature. But I think brownfield is pretty complex to introduce it, and it's even worse if you have Cloud Director on top. So you should start with a separate infrastructure, new NSX manager, projects, and then migrate customers over. Good old migration updating scenario.
Maybe let's also come to the difference between self-service, multi-tenancy, and managed service, or however you want to call it. Because a lot of service providers out there are also providing just managed services, so the customer does not necessarily have access to it. And very often we have the discussion then is, do we really need Cloud Director? Can't we do all of this directly with NSX and vSphere and stuff like that? And whilst in theory you can do this, and you can create your permissions and roles for your internal teams to keep all of that separated and everything else, I would still argue that in many, many cases, it would be better off to directly start in a vCD environment, or at least start implementing it moving forward for new customers. Because we also hear more and more that customers want to have access, console access to machines. Customers want to have the ability to manage even only parts of the machines and stuff like that. And that is really getting difficult if you're not set up for it. The other advantage is, again, coming back to the logs, if there is ever an incident or anything on a specific customer, it's much easier if you can pull everything out of Cloud Director and just say, it's like, hey, everybody uses this tool, so we can actually say who did have access to a console, who did make changes to the networks, to firewalls, and all of these different things, because everything is managed directly within Cloud Director. Rather than having tons of different products where you need to pull it and it's not separated by tenant. Clearly, so far, even in vCD, not everything is perfect from a logging perspective, but it's much easier in such a case than it is with a standalone system. Also, let alone if you keep your people and your management teams as a managed service provider utilizing Cloud Director, the side effects, if you ever have a security incident by yourself as a service provider, is potentially lower, because people don't have admin privileges on all the backend infrastructure. And in reality, most of the people don't need that. Whereas in the vSphere and NSX environments, we very often have seen when service providers did this really with the, let's say, more bare metal tools, that most of the people had more or less complete admin privileges. So if anything happens in your infrastructure, someone immediately has access to everything. Whereas in the Cloud Director scenario, you can be far more detailed from a permission and role perspective, because also the default roles are set up for service provider environments. So you can actually easily adopt one of these roles, whereas when you look at the vCenter or NSX roles and permission sets, then very often they are meant for enterprise use. So they are not meant to separate clients from each other and stuff like that, which can also, when we talk about sovereign clouds in Europe, become a scenario where you want to separate by countries or other things. So there are tons of different scenarios.
Yeah, it's not just about, it's all about security, but it's still, even though if you have a really small team taking care of all the customers, using a multi-tenant platform makes it easier to administer, even though I'm administrator everywhere, even though if I just see one customer and virtual machines, networks, and services belonging to a single customer, makes life a lot easier for everything, deploying new stuff, troubleshooting, and so on and so forth. Yeah. No, it slipped. Sometimes it happens, right? It was a really nice thought, and now it's gone. Yeah.
Another area which makes up the whole it does not necessarily belong to multi-tenancy, but it is a feature set which is often requested, is having the ability to have a generic shared catalog of either applications or media and stuff like that, and then individual ones per company. So as a service provider, I can then provide like basic Windows images and stuff like that. and then the customer can add their own images and scenarios like that as well. That requires a certain set of capabilities in the toolkit that you can do that, which is potentially more complex if you try to build something like that in a vSphere or in a 6 baseline scenario.
Also enabling like a shared view or shared view environment in terms of, so I'm not talking about co-managed because that's a no-go scenario for me. But even though if I consume managed services, I can enable the customer to with a read-only role. So I implement something, the customer files a ticket, I build the service as the customer requested, and then the customer has read-only access to only his configuration. So it makes it a lot easier, because if the customer kind of requires a reconfiguration, let's say an additional firewall rule, whatever, the customer can review the actual current used firewall rule set and then file a ticket asking for, could you please do the following change? So I think that's also pretty neat with a CMP, which is multi-tenant. Never do co-managed. So just what is co-managed? Co-managed is self-service and managed service at the same time. So customer and service provider have administrative or read-write access to the same configurations, and both are allowed to implement changes. That's kind of a nightmare scenario for everyone.
What we see with many service providers, they have partners, small system integrators that brings their own customers to the service providers in an, let's call it double managed environment. That are normal use cases on many of our service providers. And that are good solutions. They are partnering very good together and bringing value, because normally a service provider are not managing the Windows servers or applications, whatever running in the environments. That's not task of the service providers in the most use cases.
Heavily depends what I say can be, if it is kind of managed service approach with additional self-service, but also what you mentioned right now, Sasha, that the service provider itself is only really hosting the environment, but he has also some companies saying, hey, okay, I will not host a whole cloud director stack, but I will utilize your data centers for providing my end customers the services like Active Directory and stuff like this. So it is always, I think it is a mixture of all.
Though especially on the bigger service providers, that's the same like on the hyperscalers. So the hyperscalers provides the infrastructure, and the system integrators or smaller service providers, using this infrastructure like Azure or Google infrastructures to provide their services for their customers.
Good. So anything we missed on the multi-tenant topic? I think we kind of covered most of the areas. If any one of our audience has any questions, feel free to drop them in. But I think we covered most of the most important topics, so that we have things like clearly separated user management, which is something we covered. We've spoken about having clear log management, clear permission management. I think one part which we didn't cover is, but that comes more or less natural, is performance management. So the service provider can define which performance settings can be managed by the end customer. There might be needs for branding. However, I don't necessarily always see that as a strict requirement in the first place. And
but you're capable of doing that, Yves.
Yes.
The only one in the whole organization.
Don't tell anyone. However, I have given up the secrets of the databases already to some, so maybe that's the next I have to give up.
I can't remember.
Better. But yeah, so I think that more or less covers it, and that is also for those service providers who are currently looking into potentially jumping ship from a VMware perspective as you're evaluating new tools. Potentially take today's session as a list of requirements you should really be looking for. Again, I would still argue it's not necessarily easy to find all the replacements. We know some people are doing it, and that's perfectly fine. But I think it's also important to say is like multi-tenancy is highly complex. I mean, VMware wanted to get rid of Cloud Director for many years, and finally always figured out it's not that easy. It takes too much time or is too complex, and there is too much difference towards the enterprise tools. So it's going to be interesting. I mean, we have seen also the roadmap and everything like that for what the new plans are. Let's see. Let's cross that bridge when we get to it. It's going to be interesting to see how much effort it is to actually bring all the features and functionality into all the other VMware products versus just keeping Cloud Director as it is and maintaining it. But I think that's more or less covering the multi-tenancy topic. Do we have any idea already what's going to be there for episode 30? I mean, it's not that far out.
Let's see what the next product cycle really shows up, because I have heard some rumors that maybe some new versions are approaching. Let's see.
So it could be a release note session then, or it could be something else. It seems like we have a lot of interesting security topics coming up in the last few days and weeks. Also, if you haven't seen the post, it's like, please make sure that you update your systems. The VMSA, I think 2024-0011 is not fun. Really take care of that one, because if your customers have the ability to utilize a CD controller, you are in trouble. And not only that, there are a few other things where you might be in trouble. So better be safe than sorry. So make sure that you keep your systems updated. Also, if you haven't done so, try and make sure that you subscribe to the Broadcom security lists, because the old VMware ones are not sending out anything anymore. So you need to be on the new lists to get all the latest and greatest. From that perspective, you can also subscribe to my channel, but I'm not guaranteeing that I'm always up to date to the day. So better go to the source as always. Okay, that being said, next recording is going to be approximately in 2 weeks. I think we haven't yet finally set the date and time for that, because at least Sasha and I think, are not 100% sure where we are then. Or we know where we are, but we don't know when we have the time for it. But that being said, thank you all for watching. Also, to all of those who are watching us live every few weeks, the number of people is constantly growing. We like that. We also like more interactivity. So come with questions, throw them in. You can actually influence topics we are going to talk about. So the more you actually participate in the sessions, the more you will get out of it what you want. That being said, I'm already saying bye-bye and handing over to Toby for the final words.
Yes, thanks for joining. Maybe one last add-on or one last comment on the whole discussion for today, because Sasha mentioned it already, but just to rephrase it a little bit, especially you as a service provider, now with the new license model, vCD is there for more or less free. It is included in the base license pricing, so just utilize it. So that's my last words for today. Sasha.
Yeah, sit together with architects, plan your environment, take a look what's possible with the features you pay for and the features are available, and then plan your infrastructure. Matthias.
I still don't vote for co-managed.
Final words, no co-management for Matthias. And that being said, thank you all for watching and have a wonderful week. Bye-bye.
Thanks, bye.